Great, fabulous. And now I need you to wrap things up around 6:19, okay?
To vote to raise the
Okay.
debt ceiling,
Okay,
but
great.
it's only
6:19,
until
6:20 at
White
the
House Press
latest.
Secretary Jen Psaki said
Okay.
Okay, but how you doing?
we don't need to kick the can.
I'm great, Santita. God is amazing.
Oh,
That every
absolutely.
day brings
That's
additional.
the only thing that keeps me great.
He's
Let His
Ooh,
will be done.
hired today
I heard that.
with signs of
I
progress
heard
in
ain't fooling with him.
U.S. resolving its debt
I heard that.
situation.
I heard that. How's
In New
Dasha
Mexico,
doing?
authorities say they used GPS from an
Hey, girl,
electronic ankle
you about to make me
to
shout.
locate
Yesterday, she called Deborah and I,
reportedly beating
and
his wife
she's an honest college.
in the
They
heat
called her
of the
into a room yesterday,
Notice a tailor-made
to
wrist
her and
for
Dallas, and
Taylor's
said, "Y'all whole
bottom of the
college
ninth
full
in
ride
Los
is paid."
Angeles. The
Is that
NL
wonderful?
wild
Praise
card
God.
win. This is AP News.
Yes,
Is that, I mean,
The
what a
White House is
blessing.
vowing to make COVID
yes,
tests
sir.
What a
Yes,
blessing.
to U.S. households.
What a
full
blessing.
ride. Yep.
What a blessing. I'm so happy for you all. Andre, Dave, Linda, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing? We have a big reproductive rights decision that came down. And then we found out several things happened yesterday. Moderna was paused in Sweden and Norway. So we're going to ask about Sweden and Denmark, excuse me, Sweden and Denmark. You know, should we be concerned about Moderna here? Because they have paused it. Darius, they will not use for anyone under 30. They will not be dispensing the Moderna vaccine, which is very interesting. You know, I think those are things that we need to think about. Because if they're not going to do that over there, now they're much more. They, you know, they're a lot more skeptical, I would say. They'll call them skeptical. I think probably because they're European. They call everybody else hesitant. But they're much more skeptical of vaccines in the Nordic countries. In fact, they don't heavily vaccinate their children at all. So but they're not going to give Moderna to anyone under 30 at this time. J&J, some people are reporting blood clots. I bring these up because I think that we need to know exactly what's going on. Ask the questions because, you know, whenever you take medicine, you're supposed to tell your doctor about any way you're feeling because that helps them. That helps them. And so, you know, that the only way the medicines can be perfected is if we start talking about, well, you know, my arm hurt for a long time, or, you know, for a couple of days I was really, really sick. Because even then, that would help your doctor to say, hey, be prepared for this. So that's why I bring that up. So everybody, please like and share. And I thank you for more and more of you are moving over. Carol, if you would, sweetie, not me. Can you move over to YouTube? I have been told that YouTube is where it should be. Facebook should be our portal to YouTube. So if you would, everybody, please go over to YouTube and like and subscribe on the Santita Jackson Show. The Santita Jackson Show. We're going to be talking about the budget with Dr. Max Wolf. It seems that we've averted a disaster with the debt ceiling, at least for now. At least for now. I don't know how much longer that's going to last. And we need to find out for him, you know, what the deal is with the budget, because we all have a dog in that hunt. And let me see. And we're going to grade the media. Isn't it interesting that the media have continued to, if you listen, it's the progressives who are being told that they really need to, they're the ones who need to adjust. They're the ones who basically need to cave in. And he believes in unions. They're really, really supportive of Senator Sinema and Manchin and a centrist or right-wing perspective. You've got to listen. So we're going to be talking with fairness and accuracy in reporting about how the media are protecting, as they said, people who are promoting this kind of obstruction.
Chicago's Progressive Talk,
So,
WCPT
5.
where facts matter.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Thursday, Wow, October 7th, Thursday, October 7th, 2021. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you, coming to you from the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, WCPT and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want to hear your voices today. We've had a lot of things happen, even a decision about reproductive rights overnight. So I wanted to get your thoughts about that and about so many things. What is on your mind today? Call me at 773-763 WCPT, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Everybody, I want to hear your voices today. Call me, call me, call me. We're going to be talking to Dr. Max Wolf about the budget. We're going to be talking with Jim Narakis of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting about the mainstream media's support of Manchin and Sinema. Indeed, they are supporting the moderates. If you listen to their languaging, if you listen to how they have characterized the progressives, I think it's important for us to understand what we are looking at. And we will be looking at our health with doctors Shanina Knighton and, of course, Dr. Deborah Furr-Holden. Did you know that Moderna has been paused in anyone 30 and under in Sweden and Denmark? Should we be concerned about that here? And there's so much that is going on. I mean, there's so much that's going on. So we're going to talk about all of that today on the Santita Jackson Show. How you doing, Eddie James and Daryl and Linda and Carol? Thank you, sweetheart. When you get a new phone, okay, it's all good, Carol. It's all good. Benjamin Hooks. And let me see, Shirley from Philadelphia. I'm sending much love to oh my goodness, to everybody today. Hope that you all are feeling good. Shirley from beautiful Philadelphia, Barbara Bacon, Samantha, Will, Andre, Carissa, Dave Dowling, all of you, like and subscribe. Please go on over to YouTube if you can. Carol can't do it yet because she's got to get a new phone. So you all, let's send Carol a lot of love. Send her a lot of love, everybody. So let's get to a few of these headlines today, everybody, so that we can get on with the rest of the show. In Chicago, we're going to have a high of 71 degrees. It will be rainy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 71 degrees, partly cloudy. The Dow closed up 102 points yesterday. The NASDAQ closed up 68 points. And the S&P 500 closed up 17 points. Well, the National League wild card game. Who won? The Dodgers, 3-1 over the Cards. Now they're going to advance to face the Giants in a best-of-5 National League Division Series championship. Congratulations to the Dodgers. That's right, Jackie Robinson's old team, everybody. A federal judge has blocked the enforcement of the Texas law banning abortion as early as 6 weeks. U.S. District Judge, federal judge, Robert Pittman granted the Biden administration's request to temporarily halt the law, clearing a path to restore access to abortion in the nation's second most populous state. The judge called out Texas officials for crafting, quote, an unprecedented and aggressive scheme, as he put it, to deprive its citizens of a significant and well-established constitutional right. This court will not sanction one more day, he wrote, of this offensive deprivation of such an important right. Close quote, the judge wrote in his 113-page order. It will almost certainly be appealed. And will this go to the Supreme Court? We're going to find out very, very soon, everybody. Indeed, it has been stated that this new Supreme Court term will deal with abortion rights. What do you think is going to happen? 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT. The debt ceiling deadline is closing in, everybody, but a solution may be in the offing, everybody. After Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell publicly floated two potential options to avert a default, which would be the first in the history of the United States, everybody. Republicans as a whole are opposed to handling the debt ceiling problem. So Senator McConnell's sudden willingness to find a solution, according to the CNN report, is an interesting development. As of last night, he said that talks were underway to finish a deal to extend the debt ceiling for 2 months. Will that be enough? Now, two newly published studies confirm that the immune protection offered by 2 doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine drops off after 2 months. It drops off rather sharply, everybody, but it still protects you against disease. We're going to be talking about that with Dr. Deborah Holden. What do you think about that? And how are you protecting yourself as we're watching the drop off in these vaccines? And this sad news, more people have died this year from COVID-19 than last year, according to Johns Hopkins data. Since January 1st, more than 353,000 deaths have been reported from COVID-19, about 1,000 more than last year's 352,000 in the first 2 months of the pandemic, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. There are key differences between the first 2 years that could account for some of the shift, medical experts said. And so there were a lot of people, they said being exposed in the face of not really having herd immunity anywhere and having the Delta variant, which is much more contagious. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? And Merck, we federally financed these vaccines, the American people did. And now, guess what Merck is doing? They are going to sell their COVID pill. It's a 5-day course that will really pretty much cure you of, or really make you asymptomatic. This new medicine is hailed as a huge advance in the treatment of COVID-19. It costs $17.74 to produce, but guess what? They are going to sell it for 40 times what it costs to make. Talk about a windfall of profits. They will sell it for 40 times what it costs to make. What do you think about that? You're going to have to pay a whole lot of money. And if you're not insured, too bad for you. President Biden is giving the Democrats a green light to weaken the filibuster for debt ceiling votes. What do you think about that? Should he do the same thing for the voting rights? You let me know. 773-763-9278, 773-763 WCPT. If you want to text me, GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text. So I want to know what you're thinking is about that. Now we're finally going to get some relief with the with the filibuster. But guess what? Very interesting. There's a Gallup poll that shows that Americans' opinions of the Democratic Party have fallen slightly from an elevated level this year, and more gain view the party unfavorably than favorably. But party favorable ratings are near parity. Both parties, both of the major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are viewed negatively by the American people. What do you think about that, everybody? Biden has lost popularity, primarily among independents. That's a factor. But the Republicans' current favorable rating among all Americans is a little different from the 37% recorded in January. Its favorable rating then was down 6 points from the prior reading in November, shortly after Election Day. What's going on? Americans are looking at both parties and giving them the side eye. We have got some good news coming from the great Pastor Darius Brooks. Of course, your will is what's best for me. And of course, we've gotten to know him down through the years with the Tommies. He's one of the most beloved figures in modern day gospel. Indeed, he's one of the architects of it. But now he's a pastor. He's a pastor of Grace Central Church. It's a wonderful, wonderful church, a little church that could. And we are so pleased to have him with us today. Pastor Darius Brooks, what is the good news?
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
The good news, Santita, my God, is you better mean what you say and say what you mean. Matthew 5:36 through 37 says, let what you say simply be yea or nay. And if I had to use for a thought tonight, Santita, that blessed my life all this week, is learning to agree more than disagreeing. Learning to agree more than disagreeing. Santita, God has a perspective from where he sits that sees and knows things differently from where we sit. Often what's in front of you and me and those that's under my voice, it gives us our answer. More often than not, the things we're looking at right in front of us, we not have to say, oh my God, but it gives us our answer. But because we disagree with it, or them, we miss the agreement. When God says obedience is better than sacrifice, he's really saying his word is more of an investment than what you have to sacrifice or go through. Obedience, or another word for it, is trust. This kind of trust is like a child and the parent who has their best interest at heart. The obedience is not simply just for a child to obey. It's for the child to trust and know that the parent knows what's best. And in this, God directs us. To understand God, to really do not know what's best, requires seeing what's literally in front of you or me. We have to trust in that this ain't true. You got to be kidding. Yes, it is. And understanding it, things are constantly changing. We cannot think that things in front of us is going to stay the same. And see, the things are constantly changing, and it's going to continue to change. Change is here, whether we like it or not. And most are in favor of progress, but it's the change that they do not like. And when change do come, even extreme change, Santita, it's not because they see the light, but it's often because they feel the heat. So often when something is in front of us, God gives a purpose and a promise. And whenever you see something in front of you, the adaptation or the modification is the order of business. When you see what you see, good, bad, right, wrong, flaws, and all, Santita, it's there to say, what do you think? You going to do this or not? My response, I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you and how you see it. But this is how I see it, the way it's given to me. And this is how it will be done. Wonderfully, the believer who's in him, who understands this, who trusts and obey, let what they say simply be yea or nay. Anything the Word of God says, this is what got me sent to you, and I'm done. He says, anything more than this, God calls evil. Whenever we don't be honest with ourselves and honest with people, good, bad, right, wrong, flaws, and all, he says, ain't nothing going to come out of that but evil. And the more, watch this, and when you're doing things that's not healthy, Santita, often people complain. And the more you complain, the less you obtain. Wonderfully, when we trust God, which is his word, we live and we do what he say do. When we mean what we say and say what we mean, we live our lives with an exclamation, not an explanation.
The more we complain, the less we obtain.
Yes, sir.
And it is about living your life with an exclamation, not an explanation. I hear you.
Not an explanation. Yes, sir.
I hear you. I hear you. I absolutely hear you. And I thank you for that, because we needed that today. Thank you so much, Pastor Brooks. You all are now celebrating. You're doing your worship in person. Where are you, and how are you doing it? Are you physically distant from one another in the sanctuary?
We're still practicing social distancing. We're also doing mask, and we are open on Tuesdays from 7 to 8, 1 hour of, we call it our life application class. And then on Sunday, 10216 South Kitchener Street, Westchester, Illinois, we're in service 1 hour and a half. We definitely are doing social distancing, and people are in church. Santita, you know, yes and no, mean what you say has a lot to do with you as a person, building your character and listening to your heart. I found out people don't do what they want to do. People find a way to do what they want to do, even in the negative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talking about these vaccines. You can't fight with these people, and I'm sharing with Ray Central at this point. Find another way to let them get it. When we tell people what they should and shouldn't do, they put up a fight. But when you ask them things like, well, hey, why won't you? What's going on? Or what would you do to get it? You know, it's our approach to things and how we deal with things that we can get answers from people. The normal people fight them. You ain't got no sense. They dying. They're crazy. That's true. But what's the wisdom in trying to get them to receive it? God gives the wisdom, Santita.
Well, you know,
and
I hope that we will also fight for therapeutics, because once you've been diagnosed, are you going to get medicine? See, that's the key. Because there was also a story that I came across. We've got Dr. Deborah Verholden on. They're now beginning to deny people treatment based upon their vaccination status. A woman was getting here's the story right here. Stay right here, Pastor, because I really think that there's something wrong with this. It's a Colorado woman with stage 5 renal failure. She was months away from getting a new kidney, Now she and her donor are looking for another hospital after leaving of the University of Colorado's, after learning of the University of Colorado's new policy. According to their policy, the majority of transplant recipients and living donors are now required to be vaccinated. So they turned her down. Now she has got stage 5 renal failure. They're not going to give her her transplant because she doesn't have the vaccine. And now, and that is the policy of the University of Colorado's health system. They will deny transplants to the unvaccinated in almost all situations. Stay right there, Pastor. There's something about that, Dr. Verholden. I have a whole host of questions to ask of you today. There's something about that. It just doesn't, that's not right, Dr. Verholden. Can you help me with that?
We're going to see more and more of this, though. We're going to see more and more. Remember, we tried to carry. We tried to carry. They tried to bribe people. They tried to give them the lottery. They tried all that. Now we're going to see the stick, and the stick is going to get more and more harsh and more severe. This is how it's going, and it's only going to increase. I think we're going to see more and more policies like this. We're going to see more and more mandates. Eventually you'll have to, prove vaccination status, I'm sure, to enter certain buildings. And
Oh, that's already happening. Yeah, that's already happening.
Coming.
Yeah, but it's coming. I get it. And slavery was here. And a lot of things have been here, and they've been unjust. Because I get the carrot and the stick, but in the meantime, Sweden and Denmark have paused Moderna vaccines for anyone under 30 because of problems that they've seen with the vaccines. So let's not act as if we're dealing with anything perfect. Nothing is perfect. That having been said, denying people a life-saving treatment, I just think, well, I get it's the stick, but wow, I just don't think that's right. You don't deny someone
I told you,
treatment. That's crazy. And it's immoral to me. I think it's immoral.
Well, that's expect to see more and more of that. If you can't tell, people's patience have gone. Our leaders, their patience is gone. It's gone, and now it's going to be by any means necessary. People are gonna have their hands forced to get vaccinated.
Okay.
I'm not in favor of it. I'm not saying it's right, but
no. I mean, I hear you, but in the meantime, we're seeing the Pfizer. They have a sharp drop off in their effectiveness. That just came out. This is a study that comes out of Israel because, of course, in Israel, that is the vaccine they use. They don't use any other. So you almost have like a perfect test case for the Pfizer vaccine in the state of Israel. And so what about that? I mean, there's nothing that is perfect. I mean, are we going to mandate therapeutics too? Because I don't see that.
we didn't mandate masks.
Yeah, I'm just saying. What is that?
No, I don't think that's happening. But so the way that immunity is, was to be expected. How long and all of that. We should, get closer and closer to being able to answer that question now because, the people in the trials received the vaccine. It's been 18 months for many of them, and for people who, just were not in the trials, for those folks, they started getting vaccinated in December. So we've now got that time. So it won't surprise me to see the waning immunity. And like I've always said this too, this is going to be likely a seasonal vaccination or an annual vaccination. So, here we go. Game on.
Well, I want to know because I'm shuffling all these papers. But see, they're saying the studies from Israel and from Qatar, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, support arguments that even fully vaccinated people need to maintain precautions against infections. And they're showing that, there is a sharp drop off after a couple of months, a sharp drop off in immunity. And, when we get Dr. Knighton on, I want to know, given the fact that you've got this sharp drop off, number one, you don't know when the immunity is waning, right? Is there any way that we can find out if the vaccine, the strength of the vaccine, like because 2 months to me is a very short period of time, Dr. Verholden.
Do you know how long your flu shot is good for? About
No.
4 months. It's about 4 months. It's about 4 months. And that's why people time the flu shot such that it will cover you and protect you through the season.
Okay.
This is not an unseen or brand new phenomenon for us. It's just we're, in the midst of a pandemic. And so, people are now hearing things and learning things, not realizing that this is common. This is not, sort of brand new, right? This is true of many vaccines, including the one that people get every year to protect themselves during flu season. So, yeah, but we need the research. We need the research to say how long does immunity lasts. And it's more than just antibodies. There's a whole other parts of your immune system that are involved in fighting COVID. But the antibody load is a big one. And we can measure that. You can actually measure that. But what we need are systemic, large-scale studies to answer that question. All of these questions require that we do
1 minute.
the research. And it can't be done by cobbling together a bunch of little small studies. As a scientist, anecdote is just that. It's anecdote. We need large-scale studies of populations to answer these questions. I think that would probably be more influential for some people than some of the current methods that are being used. If people could actually get their questions really answered with good data and good science.
Absolutely. We need these questions answered. And so that's why we're talking with you, Dr. Deborah Verholden, today on the Santita Jackson Show. I want to hear your thoughts, everybody. What do you think about the University of Colorado not treating people who are vaccinated, denying someone a transplant? Think about that, everybody. Think about that. What do you think about that? Call me at 773-763-9278. Let's talk on the Santita Jackson Show. Dr. Deb, I sent you a whole tranche of stuff last night, but I said, I'll just start doing that. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Because, I'm coming across stuff all the time. You know how I am. Let me get that over here. Excuse me, let me move that. But how you doing, hon? I'm sorry, I'm looking at this and I'm trying to do that. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was on my way to Baltimore last night, and then my flight got delayed, and I didn't want to risk going all the way to the airport and then being stuck there. So
Ooh.
I'm now flying out today.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I heard that.
But I asked the question when I bought my ticket, was I vaccinated? I thought, isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting?
Yep.
Well, I understand the stick.
I have Dr. Knighton on the line.
But if you had something, thank you so much, Paul. If you had something that was foolproof, because they need to be asking you what your COVID-19 status is, because that's more important. I mean, that's it.
Now I can see a hospital denying you access if you were not willing to be COVID tested. That would actually make sense to me.
Tested, yes, because I'm trying to avoid COVID-19. Period. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
That's the only way to know.
So test me.
That's the only way to know. Yeah.
I think what they're doing, I just think it's immoral to deny someone a life-saving transplant because they're not vaccinated. That is wrong.
Yeah.
That's wrong. They can use the stick all they want to. They're not even being scientific. You need to find out if someone has COVID-19 or not. That's what you need to know. If you're vaccinated and you're walking around packing all this virus and shedding it, what's the point?
Yeah.
But don't nobody want to talk about the fact that people can also go to the hospital and potentially get it too.
How about that? Because trust and believe, my mother got, they, as soon as my mother's oxygenation level was right, she was COVID negative. She was like 2 or 3 days out of ICU and they sent her home. I was like, wow, you were just in ICU at the beginning of the week. She was out. But hospitals are germ factories. I hate to put it that way, but I've had pneumonia several times, everybody, because I have viral pneumonia, which means that when I get run down, that's the opportunity that my body takes I get pneumonia. I haven't had it in a few years because the last time I had it, it was so awful. I didn't think I was going to live through it. At one night, I just said, "Wow!" I literally got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and did not go back to bed because breathing was just I couldn't breathe and I couldn't
Check your
turn.
1 minute. Search.
I mean, I had to have someone stay with me. It was like not the thing. Never want to go through anything like that again, ever, 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 ever. So, but I'm gonna pivot to the Sweden story first, and then, yeah, I mean they can go on and use that stick, but what they're doing, it's immoral. It's just immoral. It's immoral. They can keep on doing this, but God don't like ugly, and He ain't too particular about cute. No. Not when they're asking not asking you for your COVID-19 status when you get on planes internationally. They're like, okay, you're vaccinated, great, but are you COVID negative? That's what we want to know. This is just unscientific and crazy. And I don't get it.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. We're going to be talking about the budget with Dr. Max Wolf in the next hour, and we're going to be grading the media. It seems that the media are praising the Mavericks, the cinemas, and the mansions for blocking aid to American people. We're going to break that down with Jim Narekas from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting in the next hour. But right now, we're talking with Dr. Deborah Furhold. And, Dr. Deb, she holds court on the Santita Jackson Show every day. And we bring in Dr. Shanina Knight, an infection preventionist, research clinical scholar from Case Western Reserve University. Every chance we can get. Have a lot of questions for these ladies today, and I want you to ask your questions as well. Daryl, it makes me angry and sad, too, that someone has been denied. She has she has stage 5 renal disease, renal failure. I mean, she needs this. She and the donor are ready to have this transplant. University of Colorado said, you're not vaccinated, so we're not going to give it to you. Ouch. What do you think about that? 773-763-9278, 773-763. WCPT, send me a text there. GWC Injury Lawyers gives you that opportunity. But Dr. Deborah Furholden, let me ask you this. Because as an epidemiologist, you look at our public health. I mean, you look at the big picture. You also see the pixels, but you look at the big picture, and we need to understand what we're looking at. Sweden and Denmark said yesterday that they are pausing the use of Moderna, the Moderna vaccine for younger groups, people under 30, after they have been tracking cardiovascular effects. Is this something that we should be concerned about in the United States, or anyone who takes Moderna, should they be looking at that?
We should all be monitoring these things. Like all of our leading public health agencies should be monitoring all of these things in mass, large-scale studies, not a bunch of little small studies, large-scale studies. And notice Sweden has their chief epidemiologist and lead public health agency doing that work. Mm-hmm. And they said, based on what they've observed, out of caution, they're now going to restrict Moderna for the under 30 group. And I think they might have switched over to just Pfizer for now because they want to get more evidence. And that's what we should all be doing.
Well, why is it significant? Well, hold on. Why is it significant that they have their lead epidemiologist really leading this particular this particular initiative? Why is that important?
Because that's what you want monitoring these large scale. They're called epidemiologic studies. Like that's what you need. Like you need the right experts, leading the right charges. We've got, Dr. Fauci, who, is a physician, and he's been in a public health space, but he's not an epidemiologist. I wouldn't dare walk into the lab and try to tell them what to do, but they walk right in the community and try to tell us what to do. That's my laboratory. It's the community. That's where I do my work, and so, bravo to Sweden for, having experts do that work and not, well-meaning, big name people who aren't qualified to do it or qualified to speak on it either.
We're talking with Dr. Deborah F.A.I.R. Holden, epidemiologist, world-renowned epidemiologist, comes out of Johns Hopkins. She's the Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University. At their medical school, she's creating their School of Public Health, building it, everybody. And so according to the Swedish Health Agency, as well as Denmark, they're pausing the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine for younger age groups because they said the connection is especially clear when it comes to Moderna's vaccine, that people are developing cardiovascular problems. And so they're pausing it so that they can get more information. So as an epidemiologist, when you get this information, if you were in Washington making decisions, and you are, in a position to make a lot of, to certainly to have some influence, what would you be saying right now, Dr. F.A.I.R. Holden?
Say that again, Santita.
What do you think our epidemiologists in the United States should be doing in light of this information?
When we say our epidemiologist, just being the distinction of an epidemiologist is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Having access to the resources and the people to do these large-scale studies is something else, right? These need to be government-sponsored research that needs to be happening. See, the feds have the ability, the same way they have issued now federal mandates for vaccinations, they also can implement federal mandates for data. Everybody who's vaccinated, their data is collected, entered into a database. The State Department of Health and Human Services is required to collect certain data, and then that data gets rolled up to the Fed. A lot of that data, for example, was missing demographic information, and there was no penalty. States continued to get vaccine even though they weren't collecting demographic data on who was getting vaccinated. So we could require data collection. You could require that data be rolled up and reported up for, hospitalizations, for COVID tests, for COVID vaccinations. Like that just in and of itself would be a very simple thing to implement. This was a demand that many of us made to the White House, not only that we have these things in place, but that there be enforcement of it and that there be some consequence for the states that weren't doing it or weren't doing it well. And they just simply haven't done it. And instead, we've now got this overemphasis on the vaccine and everybody getting the vaccine. So, so people like me would love it, but I don't have the capacity. I mean, if the feds aren't requiring it, I can't, and then the data sharing, that's required. A lot of states just won't. The data that we have access to is not the kind of data that we're going to be able to draw the kind of conclusions from that are going to answer the real questions that we have.
That's unbelievable.
And the state won't share that data.
That's just unbelievable that someone like you, because we have, to me, it's like we have the wrong people in place, Dr. Deb. You're the one who you said, I have someone, everybody said, I have someone who you need to meet, and you said we need to bring her here. People need to know this young woman. You said, girl, she's fire. She's everything. She's an infection preventionist. Girl, I've never even heard of anything like that. I said, now, if you haven't heard of it, now you know I haven't. We need to talk to her. You said, because she's given me information that I didn't know, I didn't even think about. Preventing infection, Dr. Deborah F.A.I.R. Holden, in a pandemic. It's so basic. It's so basic. And we don't even, no one's talking to an infection preventionist. You talk about politicizing this thing. Doctor, Dr. Knighton, I mean, you're a registered nurse, and you're a research scholar, and you're an infection preventionist. When you hear, let me just, what can we do? I mean, it seems like we're all over the place with this information. Given the fact that we're now seeing that the Pfizer vaccine wanes, there's a precipitative drop. I mean, it still mitigates hospitalizations, everybody, but it doesn't protect you as strongly as it does after 2 months. What should we be doing? I mean, because many of us still believe that once we've gotten the shots, once we've gotten the vaccines, we've been inoculated, and that's not true. What would you recommend that we do, particularly after 2 months, if we're finding out that the effectiveness does wane?
Good morning. I would say, for one, we should never let up on our infection prevention practices because we're still discovering. We're still in the stage of discovery. We still are unsure in regards to how long the vaccines will last. We're still unsure in regards to what can be transmitted. We're still unsure. Even think about it now, like we had the Delta variant, that came out. No one was really expecting that. And so my rule of thumb is stay ready so you don't have to get ready. One thing that we know for sure in the studies is that COVID can live on the skin for up to 9 hours. Okay. So when I emphasize to individuals, make sure that you are cleaning your hands correctly and thoroughly. Only 3 to 6% of the population, as of a few years ago, cleaned their hands correctly. I'm talking about that is your full hand, 20 to 25 seconds. If you have artificial nails, if you have long nails, make sure that you're getting the toothbrush and you're scrubbing up under them. Your hands are going to touch everything. They're going to touch your keys. They're going to touch your mask. They're going to touch your computer. They're going to touch your cell phone. They're going to touch your child. They're going to touch absolutely everything. So it is essential to make sure that you are keeping them clean. Most importantly, they're going to touch your face. And we know that there's plenty of studies that show that people touch their face on average somewhere around like 2,000 times a day. And we don't think about how many times we come in contact with our own face because it is a part of our own bodies. So I remind people of that. Make sure you have protocols outlined when you have to go to the grocery store. I can't emphasize this enough, and I'm bringing this up because we all have to eat, right? So remember that cashier may have on the same exact pair of gloves, but he has just handled all of the food that you touched as a customer, but before you, he touched all of the food that somebody else touched, and he's using those same gloves. So you now have that burden of germs from all of those other people that are potentially on your food. So after you have your food, before you put it inside of your refrigerator at home, make sure you're washing your hands. Make sure that you're cleaning down your items and then put them inside of your refrigerator. But even if we back up and we say, well, what happens between the time I leave the store and make it home? It's making sure that your hands are clean before you enter your car, where you're going to touch the buttons. You're going to possibly adjust the mirror. You're going to take off your mask. And so it's really being conscious about what you're doing with your hands, because I've run across a lot of people that said, I've been very careful and I don't know how I got COVID. Think about this as a condom, as a seatbelt, that they provide some level of protection, okay? But the goal is that you have to utilize these items right in order to decrease your risk. And that is what you're doing. So if you don't do it one time, that's the one time that you're making yourself vulnerable. It has to be done every time, and it has to be done correctly.
Let me go to Mark from Barrington. Mark, what's on your mind? How you doing today?
Good morning, Santita, and thank you for taking my call.
Good morning, Mark.
I was calling in. Regarding the decision by the University of Colorado that you were discussing earlier to deny that transplant patient. And I have to say, I wanted to hear from Dr. Holden and Dr. Knighton. Don't hospitals have the right to deny transplants, precious organ to people who they feel are going to do something that reduces the efficacy of this complicated procedure? I mean, I think that's what's happening here. And so, I prefer, I'm going to reserve judgment if not, it's like it's a bit that they're doing. Because,
okay, we can't hear you now, Mark. You got a little muffled.
That's what they do.
Mark, you got a little muffled.
Yeah. I'm sorry. No, I was saying, I don't know if you can hear any better now.
Now we can, yes.
I was saying that isn't it common for hospitals to deny treatment, especially transplants, to patients they feel will reduce the effectiveness of the procedure, whatever that is?
Holden?
So I know what.
Okay, Dr. Knighton.
They do it all the time. They do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think in this particular instance, though, the difference is when we're talking about a transplant, right? A transplant patient, the minute that you literally put that organ in somebody else's body, their body is already going to be immunocompromised. They have to take all of these drugs just to get their body to even be able to recognize the organ. So they are considered in an immunocompromised state until their body can actually recognize the organ itself. So in this particular instance where they're saying that they are denying it for their unvaccinated patients, that is almost like a double whammy. And it's saying to themselves, it goes against somebody's license of do no harm, right? So if I know that I'm going to give you an organ and already just having that organ makes you more immunocompromised than what you were before you got it, and then there's a possibility that COVID toppled with that can potentially kill you, then that is not, to me, an ethical decision for them to do such a thing because of the state that the body will be in. And I'm speaking from a nursing perspective because there are organ transplant units and, where we care for organ transplant patients. And so in this particular instance, I don't see this as being necessarily a discriminatory problem in regards to it being a vaccinated versus unvaccinated. This is coming to safety when it comes to being immunocompromised. And I understand what the headline reads, but I think that this is very misleading in terms of there being more stuff that goes into this.
Okay. Dr. Verholden, your thoughts?
The question that he asked, do hospitals deny people transplants for various reasons? The answer is yes. And I know this happened to my uncle, who was supposed to have a liver transplant, and he drank, and he didn't get the transplant. So there are many conditions that hospitals attach to different procedures. My stepsister was supposed to have a hip replacement, and she used drugs. And that she was a known drug user and had a history of drug use, and she got clean in order to be eligible for the surgery. And then 2 days before, she used drugs, and they tested her, and she tested positive, and her surgery was canceled. I think what we're starting to see again, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but there's this now massive push by any means necessary to get these shots in people's arms. I warned everybody this was coming. They're going to attach it to everything that matters to people. Like, it's going to be attached to everything that you care about. So getting and I'm not saying it's right, but that is where we now are. We failed miserably at good health education and getting the word out and doing it fairly and equitably. That train has left the station. And we left a lot of people, I think, with a lot of animus and upset and sort of like, why bother now? And so now the strategy is we're going to do it by force. And we're going to, again, I think it's terrible, but we're going to hear more and more stories like this.
Well, it's interesting.
Value judgment.
But that's happening while Johns Hopkins just released this data yesterday, that COVID-19 has already killed more people this year than it did in 2020. And we have more vaccinated people, vastly more vaccinated people this year than we had in 2020. I just, I think that you have an obligation when you are everyone has the right to excellent health care. And I think that everyone has the right to get well. And I think that if you have been trained in the medical field, you have an obligation not to do any harm and to save someone's life. And I just think this is problematic, and I think this is going to play out. We're going to see it play out, just as you said that this was going to play out. 773-763-9278, 773-763 WCPT. You are absolutely right, Dr. Deborah Verholden. You said last year that this was going to happen. You already said this. You said that, wait a minute, they're going to give you the carrot. Now you're about to see the stick. And it's just very interesting when you see that. And I realize that people get denied medical, well, they get denied treatments for all kinds of reasons. But just making this decision, because we're now beginning to see unvaccinated people be denied treatments and not get treated as well, and maybe get denied certain medicines. I mean, I don't know. I just think that this is just not. We're not handling this well, and that bothered me. That is troubling to me. Why have more people died this year, Dr. Verholden, than last year from COVID-19? What's going on in the United States? Is there something that we're missing? This comes out of since January 1st, more than 353,000 deaths have been reported from COVID-19, about 1,000 more than last year's 352,000 in the same period of time. Now, this data comes from Johns Hopkins. Do you have any idea what's going on?
Yep.
Is it the Delta? Is it the variants,
Well,
or what do you think it is?
Well, one, when you say we're talking about a difference between the total number of 1,000 on a number of 350,000, that wouldn't
negligible.
Sort of rise to, it wouldn't rise to some level of what we call statistical significance, right? If you were to compare those two estimates, they're probably very similar, right? That could almost be due to chance. But what is alarming about it, right? Even if the numbers were the same, what's alarming is that we should be doing much better. We would expect a much lower number of deaths. But in fact, I'm pretty sure we've had more cases. And so the death rate is what I would really be interested in. Has the death rate, so the percentage of people who die relative to the percentage of people who get it, should be vastly lower this year. Should be vastly lower. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, and I hate to say this, and I hope it doesn't sound cold, but COVID really wiped through the most vulnerable last year, right? Like it changed the denominator, right? So every number has a numerator and a denominator, and it took a lot of the most vulnerable people last year out of the denominator, right? So that shifted some. Then we actually now do have a vaccine, which is supposed to prevent and greatly it's supposed to prevent death and greatly reduce, risk of hospitalization and death. So we have that at play. And then we now know better how to treat COVID. So the death rate is the thing that should be shifting, but it wouldn't surprise me if that number has not changed. That's the problem. The thing that's really tragic, though, to me, is that we still have so many cases. It's mind-blowing to me that we're still very much in the throes of this and dealing with as many COVID cases as we are. And you mentioned the other day, you said, well, things are starting to sort of nationally, and I'm like, that just does not jive with my lived experience in my community. We are on our 13th consecutive week of increased cases.
But I'm just going on what I'm reading in the news, right? But I'm telling you, my experience, my lived experience like yours is very different. When they talk about the unvaccinated not wearing masks, I'm like, oh, no. My lived experience is this. I'm around people, not all the time, but enough times. The people who walk around with no masks or who pull that mask down, they will look at you and say, deadpan expression, I've been vaccinated, I'm good. I'm like, you can still carry this thing. You can still spread it. Hello? Dr. Deb, I've got a couple of minutes. What do you want us to know? I know I brought a lot of things to you and to Dr. Knighton, but it's just, there's a lot out here. And you all are the people that we need to ask. Dr. Deb, what can we do to stop the spread? You said last year that we were opening up too soon, and you said that we would be here. And even with all these vaccines, more than half of the United States has been vaccinated, and people are still dying. When we didn't have it, at the same rate that when we didn't have it. I mean, what is it? What can we do?
Yeah, people need to do the same thing that we've been talking about this whole time. They need to practice that basic prevention. And it's so cool, right? Because when Dr. Knighton, really, really breaks it down, right?
All
Like
the
this
time.
is her lane. Her lane is how do I prevent the spread of infections in hospital settings, in community settings? How do I train people to get them to be more mindful and not be their own vector and contaminate themselves and things like that? I saw this commercial the other day for a mask that comes on a lanyard.
Did you cringe? Did you cringe? Okay, look, I saw the first one maybe about a year and a half ago, and I cringed. And when the kids were going back to school and I was doing presentations, I said, this is not acceptable as something to have for your students.
Oh, my gosh. That is crazy. What?
And I just thought, man, this is crazy because, it's a free market. And so, of course, companies are going to, create products that fill gaps, and we've all done it. When we did have mask mandate here, I remember, just running out of the house to run to the store. One time I went to get a bottle of wine, and the wine shop is literally about 4 or 5 blocks from my house. I hadn't been out of the house probably in a month. I get in the car, I drive to the wine shop, I get out my car and realize I don't have my mask on. Dang it. So I got to get back in the car, drive all the way back home, whatever. It was fine. So I could imagine a lot of people have done that, right? You just moving too quickly, you forget your mask. So this notion that you could have it, like your eyeglasses, just like around your neck, probably makes sense to people. Oh, yeah, and then I'll pull it up as I need it. And all I could see was Dr. Knighton shaking her head.
Wait a minute, going 15 fingers together. Now you shouldn't do it this way. This is not hygienic, boys and girls.
It literally never dawned on me though until she said it.
Of course not.
I can tell you.
Well, no, but I got a heart out. Stay right here, everybody. We're going to be talking during the break, but then we're going to come up and talk about the media praising Mavericks for blocking aid to Americans. Back in just a minute. Dr. Verholden, I'm going to have to. Well, you all keep talking. We're going to be okay. I saw it on the lanyard, and I said, "Oh," but people. That's the standard operating procedure. Folks bring the mask down to their necks or under their chins.
But it was but you remember the gator mask? So and that was the thing when those gator mask things came out, then, you had the CDC and others that were speaking out about that too. But I looked at that thing and I started seeing people wear them and say, oh, well, I could just pull it up around my neck. And I'm like, no, I know that's not going to be acceptable. But unfortunately, that's where we are. But I can tell y'all, and I think this is the thing, and it goes to show the power of preaching the message in the community, and there needing to be more individuals like myself that are doing this work. Because when I tell y'all, I kid you not, I can highlight, some schools, and I'm talking about Cleveland is the largest poor city, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'm still going inside of our public schools here. And the protocols that they have outlined, where they got the temperature check at the door, you got somebody that's making sure that the masks are pulled up and education is being provided. You got somebody that's doing the hand sanitizing. My kids' school recently just got a grant so that way they can do voluntary testing. So you can actually have your kids, a nurse is going to monitor, but your kids actually swab their nose on a weekly basis. So that way they can do weekly testing of the kids. So I'm seeing a lot of like initiatives that are happening right now that are absolutely working. I'm still seeing places that are keeping up with these infection prevention practices that I talk about, and I can tell you that their numbers are low. Even on the campus where I work, our numbers is lower than what's happening in the county right now, and I'm talking about drastically lower, like a 0.4%. And so, and I'm bringing that up just simply to say, I know that all of these mitigation measures, when we're talking about masks, distancing, hand washing, vaccines, for people that ain't getting vaccinated, being tested on a regular basis, and then too, doing a daily assessment, all of these things.
We have Mr. Nurakus.
When they all work together, and they can all work together for the common good. But the problem comes is when you're only saying, oh, well, just get vaccinated or just do this or don't do that. And that's the problem. And just one last note, Santita, and I'm hoping that we talk about this at some point. It's the ethical decision that we have to understand or come to is, are we as mankind at a place right now where we're saying that in order for us all to live, then we have to have vaccines, meaning like mankind can't survive without vaccines. And if that is the case, are there people that naturally just say, I choose to, like, does this come down to a conversation of where we need to be talking more about advanced directives in our country? Because maybe everyone doesn't want to have, maybe we all have a different choice in regards to how we decide to go. And I just don't think ethically we're talking about that. And I don't think that we're addressing the fact if every life matters, why is it that a unvaccinated life doesn't matter, or someone that may be of a different color or, age doesn't matter, but this person does? And so what happens in order for us to avoid the cherry picking and the bias that we know has existed in healthcare for so many years? And so I think that there are a lot of issues to unpack here, but I think us focusing on this one thing only provides impetus, or provides a way for us to continue to discriminate even more.
It's that we're opening a door that this is not going to be good. You're right, Dr. Deb. We have the carrot, now we have the stick. But the thing is, if this prevented us, if this actually changed the trajectory of this pandemic, I would say you're making a lot of sense. But people still need to find out. See, the vaccines have made us think that you don't need to get tested for COVID-19, and you do. You need to find out if you're carrying, if you have the virus. You need to find that out. I mean, they're just things that we're not thinking. We're just condemning people. And I just think that is not a good thing. That's not going to end well, everybody. It's just not. Dr. Furholden and Dr. Knighton, boy, we had a lot to talk about. You all let me know what you all want to talk about tomorrow, because I think that the ethical issue, I think that's a big issue. Um, hmm, there's a lot. You've got the abortion ban that's about to go to the Supreme Court. You've got more people, have died. That's what it is, Dr. Verholden, have died this year from COVID-19 than last year, according to your alma mater. Wow, it's just a lot. And then Sweden and Denmark paused the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine because of emerging cardiovascular issues. So I think that's something that we need to be looking at in the United States, and we need to have a discussion. It doesn't mean you don't get the vaccine. There are so many layers to that, Dr. Deb. I mean, who was impacted? What was their health status? Were they young? Were they old? And they're not giving it to the young. I mean, let's have the discussion in the United States. But you can't have that discussion without saying that you're anti, which is crazy. Like, come on, you guys. It's not even scientific. I love you, Dr. Deb and Dr. Furholden. Dr. Furholden and Dr. I'm going to let you all go because I'm going to move on to this topic. Oh my gosh, this is too much. You all giving me too much. I am in talk radio at this moment in history. How did that happen to me? Whew, it's too much. But I love you both, and I will speak with you a little bit later. And look out for some text for some links from me later on, Dr. Deb. And feel free to send me some too. Okay. Greetings from California. Mask mandates are being dropped in the Bay Area. Wow. And crowd gatherings are being encouraged. See, Just, okay. Unbelievable. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, as you can see, we get things started right early in the morning on the Santita Jackson Show.
Yes, you do.
We've been talking about a lot. Well, I try to have a platform where people can just really talk about COVID-19 without being judged, so they can get some information and get protected.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's a joy to be with you on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station at AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. This is the Santita Jackson Show. I want to hear your thoughts, everybody. We're going to be talking about, the media. How are they handling the Mavericks? That is to say, who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy in this budget fight? Yeah, we're going to be talking with Dr. Max Wolf at the bottom of the hour about what the budget is. What is the debt ceiling? Why should it matter to you? What's in it for you? What would happen if we couldn't pay our bills? How would it change how we live, and how would it change how the world lives? Wow. What would it be like for an America, for a world when an America does not have the reserve currency of the world? There's a lot to cover today. And of course, if you want to hear the podcast of this show, go to WCPT820.com/Santita so you can hear that stirring conversation about COVID-19 that we just had with Dr. Deborah Verholden and Dr. Shanina Knighton. And of course, the good news from Pastor Darius Brooks. But we've got Jim Narakis from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And we're going to get to him in a hot second after I get through a couple of these headlines. I am Santita Jackson. Let's hit it, Paul. Charles, in Chicago, we're going to have a high of 71 degrees. It is already very cloudy. It's going to rain today. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 71 degrees, partly cloudy. The Dow closed up 102 points. The NASDAQ closed up 68 points. The S&P 500 closed up 17 points. And the National League wildcard game, well, a decision was made, everybody. The Dodgers were triumphant over the Cards, 3-1. Now they will advance to a best-of-5 series against the San Francisco Giants for the National League Division Series. And so we wish them well, and it ought to be a great, 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 great series. Two great, great, great teams. A federal judge has blocked the enforcement of a Texas law banning abortion at as early as 6 weeks. U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman gave a scathing indictment of the Supreme Court, really, in their decision regarding reproductive rights. The judge called out Texas officials as well for, quote, crafting an unprecedented and aggressive scheme to deprive its citizens of a significant and well-established constitutional right. He continued, this court will not sanction one more day of this offensive deprivation of such an important right. What do you think about that, everybody? 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. The debt ceiling deadline is closing in. It's closing in, everybody. But a solution, baby, coming after Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell publicly floated two potential options to avert a default. This will be the first default in America's history. Let's hope that it works. Two newly published studies confirm that the immune protection offered by 2 doses of Pfizer COVID-19's vaccine drop off after 2 months. And we also see that more people have died this year from COVID-19 than last year, according to Johns Hopkins. Since January 1st, more than 350,000 deaths have been reported from COVID-19, about 1,000 more than last year's 352,000. President Biden is giving the Democrats a green light to weaken the filibuster so that he can get the debt ceiling lifted. What do you think? Should they keep that in place so that you can get voting rights? Maybe. Justice in Policing, George Floyd Act? Maybe. The Gallup poll has found that the Democrats and the Republicans are equally unpopular in the United States of America. Americans' opinions of the Democratic Party have fallen slightly from an elevated level this year, and more gain view the party unfavorably than favorably. Meanwhile, 56% have an unfavorable view of the Republicans, and 40% have a favorable view. That about wraps it up. And then Sweden and Denmark, that was part of our headlines too. They're pausing Moderna COVID-19 vaccines for younger age groups, for people under 30. Let's get right to this. We're still in the midst of this budget fight. We've got physical infrastructure, roads and bridges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, more than $1 trillion. And we've got what was more than $6 trillion. That was what Bernie Sanders originally envisioned. And then it was whittled down to $3.5 trillion. And now Republicans want to take this all the way down, personal infrastructure, 2 free years of community college, for example, getting dental coverage and vision coverage and hearing coverage in Medicare. What's going to get cut? Because that's what's in the $3.5 trillion package. Well, so many of our attitudes are shaped by the media. They're shaped by the media. That's why I'm always so excited to be able to talk to the people from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I have been following them for decades, and I urge you to give them your support because they really help us to step back and analyze what the media are doing, analyze the messages that they are sending out. So I was struck by their newest investigation that says that the media are praising mavericks, if you will, like the John McCains, get it, for blocking aid to American people. President Biden's agenda, it was on life support, but now it's getting a new lease on life. We've got Jim Narakis, editor of Extra, one of my favorite magazines in the world, from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. He and Janine Jackson have been doing such great work for so many decades. Welcome home, Jim Narakis. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Always, always. The media are praising mavericks for blocking aid to American people. What do you mean?
Well, I want to say I think it's interesting the way that you introduced this topic, because you talked about the reconciliation bill in terms of what it will do for the American people. And that is generally not the way that it is talked about in corporate media. It's talked about as a process question, inside the Beltway question, as a fight between the moderates, so-called, and the progressives, but not in terms of what this would actually do for the American public, which should be the focus of coverage of Washington. Is what will this do for us? What are the choices that we have? And by putting that aside, by putting that like in maybe a separate article that's like, if you're curious, here's what this bill is actually about, and making it seem like it's all about a bunch of wrangling among politicians that who cares about that? And I think that's a way of putting these things, disguising what is really at stake here, and what the real the cost of not doing anything is. It really, it's about old people being able to pay for dental care, for people being able to take time off when their family is sick. Support for parents raising children. There's a lot in the bill, and it is, there's so much in the bill that you can't really talk about it all in one sitting. But without giving people a clue as to what the issues are here, it becomes, either an abstract, faraway brouhaha over, who gets, bragging rights, or you get these sort of personality analysis where it's about the colorful characters in Washington, and that's what the piece that we put out yesterday was largely about, was talking about Kirsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona, and she dresses funky, and she doesn't play by Washington's rules, is how the website Axios described her. Which is it makes her sound like as you say, a maverick. This is a person who, she's holding up this $3.5 $5 trillion bill, apparently mainly because she wants less tax hikes for the wealthy. That seems to be she's very cagey about what her issues are. Mm-hmm. But when you get down to it, it seems like what she is interested in is the rich paying less taxes, and she's in the midst of these negotiations. She's having fundraisers where the people whose taxes would be raised are giving her millions of dollars as an incentive to keep holding out for her, keeping their tax bills low.
But Jim, we're not hearing that. No one's talking about that.
Yeah. Another big part of this bill is climate change, and the every scientist will tell you that the time is running out for the world to do something about the changes we're making in the atmosphere that are having a catastrophic impact on the climate. We need to do something to change our energy system, our transportation system, our construction system. It all needs to change, and that's going to take investment, and that's in this bill. And the other major person who is holding up the bill is Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, who owns a coal company. He owns a company that sells coal to power plants, and he gets, according to financial disclosure forms, $500,000 a year from this coal company. So he has a direct, huge financial interest in blocking the policies that we need to stop transforming the climate in a way that will make it very difficult to support human habitation on this planet. Which, every time you talk about Joe Manchin holding up this bill, it should be pointed out that this guy has a direct stake in foiling action on climate change. And rarely mentioned. We have more references across the corporate media, and you really need to be a detective to find it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're talking with Jim Narakis. He's the editor of Extra, which is the magazine of FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. Let's talk about this today. How are the media shaping the narrative in this budget battle? Do you know that in the Build Back Better Act, that's the $3.5 trillion act that Kirsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona, and Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, they said that's just too much money. The American people, they don't need that much money. Do you need 2 free years of community college? Can you imagine taking those credits to a 4-year university? It would shave 2 years ostensibly, or at least a year and a half off of your course load at a major university, at a 4-year university. Do you know how that would reduce your student debt load? Child care and universal pre-K, do we need that? Medicare expansion. Are you going to deny grandmama her choppers? I mean, really. Dental, hearing, and vision services. Services, everybody. Extended child tax credit. Think about that. Cut prescription drug prices. Think about that. Think about the formerly incarcerated. They have $5 million set aside in this $3.5 trillion package for people who are coming out of prison who want to start businesses. They would be able to go to the SBA and get a second chance. What about that, everybody? Paid family and medical leave. All of these things. Climate change. It will be 71 degrees in October in Chicago. Jim Narakis, I grew up here. I was gone for a long time, but I grew up here. This is bizarre.
Yes, I grew up in Chicago too. And
okay,
yes,
you know we had on coats by October back in the day. Come on, you and I grew up here at the same time. Hello. Sniffling in October because you're getting ready for Thanksgiving. That having been said, I can't hear any of this. All I hear is that Kirsten Sinema is no one investigates how she got from the Green Party to here. She is a critic of the woke left, but she is a maverick. That is it seems to me that is the narrative that's been established for her and for Joe Manchin. without any mention, if you will, of Joe Manchin's financial ties to big oil and his daughter's ties. None of that. None of that. I mean, and they're being played, they're being portrayed, shall I say, as the reasonable people in the room, as the ones who are reasonable. And Jamila Priapal and Ro Khanna and the Squad, Ayanna Pressley and Maxine Waters, all these people are unreasonable. They just want too much. Help me with that.
Yeah, there is a thread in the narrative that you see in corporate media that the progressives are the ones who are foiling the Biden agenda, which is a bizarre reading of. You have these two bills, one for infrastructure and one that is largely social spending, and the infrastructure bill was able to get a small amount of Republican support, and so could be passed over the filibuster. The social spending bill will get no Republican support, and so needs every Democrat to pass it in the Senate. The most of the Biden agenda is in that second bill, in the social spending bill, and it's the progressives who are insisting that the bills need to be passed together, so that the so-called moderates, people like Manchin and Sinema, will vote for the social spending bill. And there's been this, like there was an attempt to pass the infrastructure bill first, which would almost certainly kill the social spending bill.
Mm-hmm.
And the so-called moderates, the right wing of the Democratic Party, was pushing for this to be passed first. And Nancy Pelosi did this as a sort of concession to the moderates to say, see here, we'll have the vote that you wanted. And the progressives said, no, we're going to stick with the plan of passing these two bills together so that the entire Biden agenda gets passed into law. And I realize this is like the dance that goes on in Washington can be confusing, which is why you need journalists who follow this stuff for a living to explain to people that the progressives are the ones who are sticking up for passing the full Biden agenda, and the right-wing Democrats are the ones who are trying to just pass a small fraction of it. That's
Jim,
not hard to understand.
But how is
but you get it's portrayed in the media as the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, because they're even calling the right wing of the Democratic Party the moderates.
Yeah, you never see people referred to as right-wing Democrats in the media.
Yeah, I mean, because a moderate, the language of that is, they're reasonable. The progressives are aggressive, if you will. But how do we let them get away with this? Because no one's asking, no one's questioning that.
Yeah, I mean, at FAIR we try to talk about the corporate media. We don't use the phrase mainstream media, which I think is flattering to them. And in a way, mainstream is like moderate. It gives you the impression that the establishment media, the ones that are driven by big corporate advertisers who are owned by billionaires, that these are the regular folks. And the fact is, they are owned and funded by the extremely wealthy section of our society, and they have an interest in protecting the interests of the people who are at the far end in terms of wealth. When you talk about raising taxes on the wealthy, the people who own the media are going to be paying those taxes. They have an incentive towards protecting the status quo, which has treated them very well. They've done very well under the status quo. And so the people who are frustrating change, who are putting up obstacles for any kind of progressive change that actually helps the regular people in the country, are held up as heroes, as they're the mavericks. They have the bipartisan spirit that is always talked about as a positive thing in our media. And I think you have to look at what side the bread is buttered on to understand why media are presenting the issues in Washington in this way that serves to really benefit the wealthy.
Jim Narekas, everybody, the editor of F.A.I.R, of Extra, the magazine for fairness and accuracy in reporting. They really help us to understand what's happening in media, where these narratives are coming from. I mean, because no one is discussing 2 free years of community college. I mean, goodness gracious, the First Lady teaches at one of these colleges. 2 free years, and no one is explaining what that could do to your debt load. I mean, the University of Chicago, you're a Chicagoan, you know it. It's $100,000 a year, undergrad. Undergrad. This is horrifying. The last 2 minutes belong to you. What should we be on the lookout for as we are engaged in this fight about the debt ceiling, about the budget, about social and physical infrastructure? What should we be looking out for, and what can we do to help maybe change the narrative?
Well, I think that when you are looking for the kind of coverage that you want to rely on, you want to look at coverage that talks in the terms that you do, in terms of what is at stake here. What are the bread and butter issues that are going to actually affect people? You want a people-centered journalism, not a politician-centered journalism. And I think that when you are seeing high up in the news stories what is actually going to be gained or lost by the public, then you have found the right kind of news outlet that you can rely on to explain to you what's going on.
Everybody, please get involved. I need you to go on and really be supportive of fairness and accuracy in reporting. We need this organization. We need the work that they do. Jim Narekas and Janine Jackson and the team there have been doing such great work for decades now, helping us to see what the corporate media are saying. Are they helping you? I don't think so. So you need to look for not just alternatives. We need to build out all media so that you can get it, the whole story. Jim Narekas, thank you thank you so much for the work that you do. Media praise Mavericks
15.
for blocking aid to American people. I have it on my Facebook page, everybody.
10.
You don't want to miss this. It's great. And I tweeted it out as well. Sending you much love and give my love to my girl, Janine Jackson. All the great work you all are doing at F.A.I.R. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Coming up, Dr. Max Wolf is going to break down the budget for us. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Oh, you are great.
I think that went well.
Oh, I do too. Look, let me tell you, when I read this yesterday, I said, because I didn't get to, I told you I was with my mom, so I didn't get to do all of my reading like I normally do. I was like catching as I could, as I, was spending time with her. And I said, oh boy, I'm so glad someone caught this, because making Kirsten Cinema, quirky and, just, I said, this is not who she is. This is not who she is.
Dr.
And she's
Wolf on the line.
Thank you so much. And before you go, I want you to meet Dr. Max Wolf, brilliant economist. And this is Jim Narekas. You all might already know each other. He's the editor of Extra.
Hi, Jim. Pleasure to meet you.
Fairness and accuracy in reporting. Absolutely. So why don't you all say hello?
Well, obviously a vital service. Hopefully I've been a contributor on the positive side of the ledger there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I want to thank you because he
must be a very busy man in the last few years.
Yes, we have been.
Oh my gosh. Whew.
Well, you have to worry. There's no fear of running out of work, I guess.
Absolutely. No, it's a jobs guarantee.
But but before you go, Jim, one day you have to come back and talk about, the great mistrust or grave, depending upon how you want to phrase it, mistrust that the American people have for the corporate media now. That's something that no one's talking about. I mean, fewer and fewer people are watching.
Yeah, no, it's a serious problem.
Mm-hmm. It is. I was reading a couple of white papers on it over the past few weeks, and I said, this is just, it's a powder keg, and we're just sitting on top of it. I mean, January 6th is nothing for what is coming unless we decide to get things together, really.
No, I mean, we have the media, the role that they play is vital, and it depends upon trust. And if they have lost that trust, if they squandered that trust, it's a shock to the system.
Well, it's just about gone. So we can just, it's a sad thing, but it is just about out of here. And that's something for us to really to understand. It's gone. It's gone. And the faith in our institutions.
All over the society.
Well, I mean, I was just reading a Gallup poll that shows that most Americans, more than half of all Americans, do not like either of the major parties. For example, I mean, that's not shocking, but it's dangerous when you don't trust the people who are in authority, or upon whom you have bestowed authority. And I think that Americans are going to have to grow up in our politics and understand that this is not a constitutional monarchy. This is a constitutional republic, which means you are in charge. You have to get involved. You can't be so caught up in everything that we're doing, and we're all busy and we're all on the grind trying to make it. But you have to get involved. Be involved in order to keep the government, which is of, for, and by you, in order to keep it working for you. Otherwise, it works for somebody else because they have people deposited all up and down K Street in D.C. and every other place.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also we believe everyone who tells us not to trust someone or something, and we don't tend to ask too many questions about why they're interested in our distrust.
Absolutely.
Some maturation there is pretty important, right? And I think the other lesson of the 21st century so far is just because your situation is bad doesn't mean you can't make it a lot worse.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Well, we're coming up. And so thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
Always. Can't wait to have you back.
Take care.
Absolutely.
Nice to meet you.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. Yes, we can. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Thursday, October 7th, 2021. On WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want you to meet everybody on YouTube. I'm so glad that so many of you, thank you so much, for moving over to the Santita Jackson Show channel on YouTube. Thank you. And Carol will be moving over there when she gets her phone fixed. I'm with you, girl. Thank you so much, Carol, not me. We don't want to leave her over here by herself. You all give Carol some love. Francis, thank you so much, Dave, and Chapearl. Oh, Chapearl, you need to call it. Linear Bob, I want to hear your voices, everybody. 773-763 WCPT, 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. So many of you love this segment every Thursday that we have with Dr. Max Wolf as we talk about really all things, whether they're religious, political, social, cultural, but through the economic lens. He's an economist and absolutely brilliant. There's no one better at that than this man. We've got a lot to talk about with this budget. It seems like it's consuming a lot of our time. I don't know if we really understand all that's in it. Build back better, the $1.5 trillion physical infrastructure, what the holdup is. Explain to me the budget. Why is it important in our lives? It seems like it's so far away, Dr. Wolf.
Yeah, so look, we had a pretty bold budget proposal come out of a series of conversations in the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate, and also obviously the White House. And the idea here being to sort of announce a little bit of a national policy shift, maybe for the first time since the 80s. And that's a shift back toward a maybe more active role for the government's safety net. Now, part of this had already begun unofficially and as a one-off
because of the response to COVID and the economic damage done by COVID, right? So we kind of did a little bit of that actually under Trump, and we have these massive deficits, by the way, trillions of dollars, which every single person in the Republican Party voted for immediately, because apparently they only caught this budget concern flu recently after being vaccinated. They were not just worried about it then. But then this became one of these central debates, which is when you have a great and sudden shift in the country's economy and the sort of opinions of the general public, there's an opportunity to reshape the next 10, 20, 30 years to your agenda, right? Reagan did that very successfully, kind of calling the tune for the 80s, 90s, and aughts. Mm-hmm. And there was what looked to be a bit of an opportunity to push again for a bigger change, and that is a more active role for the central government in providing basic services. That could be broadband internet, a little bit better coverage on the health insurance side, improving upon the Affordable Care Act, I guess, which is often called, Obamacare, although it's actually called the Affordable Care Act as a bill, pushing toward more extended unemployment benefits, more job retraining, a whole host of things, right? Rural internet broadband, or some urban areas, internet broadband, job training, blah, 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 blah. And this obviously was not popular with the Republicans, who feared that it would require the rollback of the Trump tax cuts, because those have really ballooned our deficits. And you can't spend more on those social safety net programs and collect less from corporations and the more affluent folks, right? And so that became a flashpoint. It also became a flashpoint because I think any serious social scientist or economist can tell you that the level of income inequality and wealth inequality in the United States has reached a point where we have some questions about whether or not it's consistent with basic democracy. Because it's very hard to have one person, one vote if some people can vote a billion times in the money race and other people can't vote at all in the money race, et cetera, right? So we kind of had a whole lot of things come to a head, and the Republican Party, the same people generally, at least Mitch McConnell in the Senate, have redeployed their tactics against the Obama administration, which is oppose everything, stall everything, use every political trick in the world. And I know, if we're going to be honest, they've decided to go back to mining a deep vein, which is the general ignorance of the American public in terms of in how the budget works.
We're talking with Dr. Max Wolf, economist, about the economy, about the budget. Now, the budget is, everything is at play right now. People are wondering, do you really understand what's in the budget, everybody? Let me just stay right there. I mean, do we really understand what's at stake here with Build Back Better and with the $1 trillion physical infrastructure bill? I mean, the American Society of Civil Engineers have already said that we need more than $20 trillion to make this 19th century infrastructure something akin to what you're supposed to have in the 21st century. I mean, Dr. Wolf.
The other thing is, we know what a budget means in a household, right? Mm-hmm. You know what it means when your neighbor spends more money on rims than reading. We have that kind of budget, right? So when you sit around that table and you try to make that money go as far as you can toward as many things as you need and want to do, you make all kinds of decisions, right? You make health insurance premium decisions versus saving for school decisions versus saving for a rainy day versus finally getting a new car. Do we get a new washer and dryer or just a new washer and try to dry the stuff around the house? These are all these decisions, right? And these decisions actually accumulate into us putting material wealth behind your priorities, right? So it's an important test. Every politician always says they're for education and public safety, but are they for it enough to pay for it? Right, and that comes kind of to a big question. You saw recent work in the New York Times that was interesting, which is in terms of what we spend on our toddlers, our young people, we're last among the developed countries. We're spending, less than 5% what other developed countries spend on young kids. So we say we love young kids, and we're interested increasingly in stopping teenage sexual assault victims from terminating pregnancies. But what do we do for those kids once they're born? Or is that around the same time that the same folks have tended to lose interest in helping these kids?
What about Build Back Better? Is that feasible? Because, now it can go, Bernie Sanders, the first iteration of this was more than $6 trillion. It was negotiated down to $3.5 trillion. Now, Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema want to bring it down to $1.5 trillion. I mean, what will get cut? Will it be of community college? Will, child care tax credits be cut, paid family and medical leave? What gets cut?
Yeah, so those are political priorities and decisions made by people jockeying for influence and trying to get bills to their constituents or people who gave them money or trying to ride the rails of their particular ideological bend, right? The economic questions are more what's affordable, what can be paid for, and what economic value is, because a dollar spent is not neutral. In other words, some things that we spend on have had a long-standing historical ability to produce enough economic activity and therefore enough tax revenue to pay for themselves many times over time. And some things don't. Just like if you use money in a household to go to school and get a better job and have a better, higher paying job for years, or are more likely to keep your job through economic ups and downs, that's money well spent. It's an investment, right? Whatever you might tell yourself, if you go out and buy a pair of shoes or a piece of jewelry, in most cases, it's not an investment, right? Mm-hmm. It has some value. You consume that value, and over time, it quickly goes to zero, right? Yeah, maybe you can get a couple bucks for reselling it, but you're not making any money on that, right? And it doesn't mean it's unimportant. It's just different, right? And so we've had a tendency to think about the things we do without being careful to look at the ramifications. Infrastructure, to your point earlier in the debate here, building that national infrastructure, high-speed broadband internet access, roads, bridges, tunnels, schools, healthcare, and public transit, which are all part of infrastructure, those tend to be very good on a number of fronts. One, they increase the level of economic activity, which is quite good. Two, they tend to pay for themselves over time in terms of economic activity. Whether they pay for themselves to the state agencies that pay for them is a question of taxation, right? So they don't always, they could. And then the other big one, just sort of keeping your eye on the social cohesion and the political issue, is public goods, like infrastructure, tend to reduce inequality. Good roads, good tunnels, good bridges, good schools, good internet broadband tends to be valuable to people up and down the income chain. Tax cuts go to people who earn a lot of money as a general rule, and then the people who are already earning more and the companies that are already earning more end up with even more, and so that tends to be redistributive up. Public infrastructure has at least the capability to be redistributive down. So it tends to be a somewhat non-controversial, successful way to spend money if you're worried about ballooning income inequality, which we are, and you're also worried about rebuilding an economy that's been really damaged. And again, I'm always the person saying this, and I regret that, but I'm still going to do it. We don't know what the damage of COVID is yet, because we don't have the luxury at this point of looking back on COVID. COVID is still a thing, right? It's still part of our lives. It's still shaping the economic circumstances. It's still conquering everyday lives. It's still infecting at least 100,000 Americans a day, it appears, and it's still claiming, in the vicinity of 1,000 lives a day. So as much as we'd all love this to be over, we've had this tendency to keep pretending it's over. And while it's certainly understandable, it's also false and doesn't seem to have helped us make the best decisions about policy in the area. So we have to figure out how to manage COVID and then maybe begin the process of imagining what life will look like after COVID, although we are decisively not there yet.
We're talking with Dr. Max Wolfe, noted economist, about the budget, Build Back Better, the debt ceiling, the actual budget, infrastructure. Before I get into, I have a question for you about the debt ceiling, but before I do that, let me go to Andre from Chicago. Andre, what's on your mind?
Hello there, Ms. Santita, and how you doing there, Dr. Maxwell?
Great hearing your voice.
Good morning, Andre. Thanks for calling.
Yes, I want to know, Mr. Maxwell, do you think that our current budget situation, what's going on in Congress, is it really economical or is it political? The reason I asked the question is because if you listen to Republicans and always talk about this tax spending, they would lead you to believe that Republicans are the only one to pay taxes. But over 80 million people voted for Joe Biden, and 80 million people pay taxes. Do you know per capita who pays the most taxes, Republicans or Democrats? And is that a fair argument about these taxes? Because what I hear about the complaints about taxes is coming from the right wing, from the Republican side. I'm not hearing Democrats out there complaining about taxes. They want these programs passed. So I'd like to know if you could elaborate on them for me, Dr. Maxwell.
Sure, it's a great question. It's actually a very complicated question. There's a couple of ways to answer it. And just in fairness, the way you answer it can determine your answer a little bit. It has been a strange feature of modern America that the bigger cities in the bluer states, so that means that the sort of larger cities in America are nearly all blue. And then the larger economic states, many of which are blue, not all, but many of which are blue, tend to pay a disproportionate amount of the taxes. So places like New York and Massachusetts and California, although Texas and Florida pay some taxes too, although they don't have much in the way of state taxes. But the total tax burden is higher in blue cities and blue states, and the total contribution to the federal budget tends to be higher in the blue cities and the blue states because that's where the incomes are highest. So you're absolutely right that there is a strange feature of modern American politics in which the people most enraged about taxes don't pay the most taxes. And the people more or less overall more willing to pay taxes, right, are actually paying a lot already. One. Two, states get an awful lot of their operating budgets, the majority in almost all cases, from the federal government. And so a lot of these anti-tax, more conservative states are actually what we call net recipients. What that means is that for every dollar they send Washington, they get back more than $1. 103 cents, 105 cents, 106 cents, whatever it is, 110 cents. The bluer states often are net donors, i.e. for every dollar they send to Washington, less than 99 cents comes back in the form of state grants. So they are net payers into the system and not so upset about taxes often, although there's plenty of tax upset anywhere, I think, to be honest. And more conservative states are net beneficiaries. So they are net beneficiaries of a system they think is oppressing them. That probably better answered by a psychiatrist than an economist, to be honest. That's kind of more about how people see themselves in the world and stuff than it is about the economy. Likewise, this budget fight is about a strategy, might be a wise strategy, that the Republican Party wants to run against deficits and be able to say that Democrats are financially irresponsible. So they've basically turned the debt ceiling, even though it's dangerous and can cripple the U.S. economy, into a campaign ad bonanza. And so that's why you see the stopgap measure, still better than nothing, but where they said, okay, we'll let you guys all vote to raise the debt ceiling, right? And this is just weaponizing that the public doesn't understand what a debt ceiling is, and they've confused the debt ceiling with deficit spending, although they actually are not the same thing.
Santita, did you get his message? He said a better answer by a psychiatrist, so we got to get a psychiatrist on here. Thank you for answering. Thank you for elaborating and answering my question. You did solve the mystery for me.
Thank you, sweetie.
Thank you, sir. Sorry I didn't have a more complete answer, sir.
He wants to get Mitch McConnell a psychiatrist. That's all he's thinking about right now. I mean,
you may already have one. You can't help it. It may not be the doctor's fault if you don't take the advice.
How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, his wife cleared a lot of money too. That's for sure.
Well, you know, she was also from a wealthy family, so there's so many moving parts. So many and influential.
They're very generous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he has the benefits of a very, very generous public health care policy. So he can go get very good care at no real cost to him because of the quality of his medical insurance that's provided for by the government.
That's right, and it's blue chip.
Provided by the government.
Yeah. Hey, Mr. Maxwell, can you answer one other question quick? How much did this insurrection cost the government? How much did it cost us taxpayers? This is what I'm talking about with the court, the suing, subpoenas. Do you know the answer to that? How much this is costing altogether?
So the insurrection that we're discussing is the January 6th sort of attack on the Capitol, or I'm just making sure I understand the question.
Yeah. January 6th assault on the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think, look, that's obviously a moving target because there's lots of open investigation. Some people will also be incarcerated, which will cost us $30,000 or $40,000 a year. There'll also be people on disability because they were hurt, especially people in public office and safety officers and first responders of different types. But we know we're into the 100 million plus area, right? And that's without factoring whatever political damage was done long term, and without factoring probably the most expensive cost, which is the amount of security and precaution for future events in D.C. and in general in Washington, D.C. and other capitals has gone way up, right? And so the thing is that tends to be expensive time and time again. So when we're done with all this, the long-term impact, a reasonable cost estimate will run into the billions of dollars, right? What it costs American prestige around the world and political stability and public faith in institutions, that's probably not something that gets fully captured in a dollars and cents calculation, but it's still meaningful and should probably be considered as part of the full cost.
I hope that helped you, Andre.
Yeah, that means that's going to be passed back to the blue states again. Then that's Texas.
Everybody's gonna feel this, honey. Everybody. Nobody gets out of this alive. But Andre, let me go on and get. Yes, I'm sorry, Dr. Wolf.
One way to think about cost too is when we don't pay our taxes or where we spend money on one thing, it means we can't spend money on other things. So if we spend a couple $2 billion before it's all said and done, one way or another, on the insurrection, that's a couple $2 billion that doesn't go to a public school, that doesn't go to fix a bridge or fix a road, that doesn't go to modernize an airport, that doesn't go to put broadband into an area that doesn't have broadband so folks can get online, that doesn't do anything productive to make the U.S. more robust economically or more competitive in the global economy, right? So the losses are bigger than the dollar amount. And the other way to think about it is when you cut taxes or spend money on one thing, it can mean canceled or curtailed social spending on all kinds of other programs. So it can come out, the cost can show itself in other goods and services not provided by the federal government.
And that's why I'm saying we're all going to feel this. I have another question from Robert, then I have a quick question for you about the debt ceiling. Robert, what's on your mind?
Hi.
Hey, sweetie.
Lately, I've been thinking about prescription drug prices. Whether it's Joe Manchin's daughter price gouging on the EpiPen, or most recently the COVID bill for Merck. They said it was going to be costing like 40 times what the development cost was, even though the government funded it.
Yeah.
And I saw somewhere else, I don't know if it was an article or a video, we like to pretend it's a free market. But since like 1930, the federal government's invested $900 billion into R&D, which then the drug companies take. So we talk about paying for the budget bill. And I guess my question is there anything still in there to negotiate drug prices for Medicare, Medicaid, the VA? And if there was, what kind of savings would there be if we went to like a free market negotiation with these drug companies that these people say they're all about?
Dr. Wolf?
Yeah, so there were some provisions bandied around, particularly by some of the more progressive folks in the U.S. House of Representatives. I don't believe those made it into the final version as it's presently being debated, but things are added and subtracted. There is a real enhancement of the Affordable Care Act, which has already passed, by the way, that was pushed through by Biden et al. And actually allowed people to get highly discounted or in some cases free health insurance if they had lost their jobs and apply for unemployment. And that very quietly has kept millions of people from losing their health insurance. And I would call out there's sort of two things. So I'm not trying to skip your question, which is about prescription drug benefits. But the cost of prescription drugs paid by Americans is very much tied to the quality and existence of their health insurance, because these medications cost an enormous amount if you pay the full price as opposed to some kind of a copay, which could be higher or lower depending on the insurance that you have. and then the medication in question and how covered it is. But I don't believe we've seen that at a broad social level, but the government is allowing states and other groups to do group negotiations on drug prices. So a version of that, a small version of that, has been promoted and is potentially to take effect with the new budget. So some of the sort of will and vision behind that has made it through. But the last thing I'll say, and this is not to, it's only a very partial answer, is until the final version of one of these things passes, it's impossible to know what's in there, because there tends to be last minute horse trading here where things are added and removed right up to the time the bill is executed. And if it's not passed, if it's not in the version that passes, it doesn't exist. Right? So if it gets traded in or traded out at the last second, it is kind of hard to know until you've gotten to that final endpoint.
Very quickly, before we go, thank you, Robert. Very quickly, I want to know about the debt limit and a possible default. What would that mean? I've got about 2 minutes, literally.
Right. Sure. So the debt ceiling just says, hey, in order to continue to spend money, which pushes us a total indebtedness above the $28.4 trillion ceiling, right? You need to have a congressional finding that moves up the ceiling. It actually has nothing to do with the budget and the deficit. The budgets and the deficits are the net effect, right? But across a year, there's ebbing and flowing of how much money you need. Right. And so we have passed this 79 times. It's just become a political stunt that's popular. So this is not real. This is a piece of political theater, but the damage done is very real. So if you don't raise the debt ceiling, they have to start furloughing workers. They have to start sending people home. They then could or could not pay them their back pay back. They have to put some military personnel on stand down. They could miss a bunch of payments. And if we miss the bond payments to the creditors, the people who buy U.S. government debt, then we could have a cataclysmic meltdown in the financial markets. But more than that, the United States government is advertising itself right now as someone you can't trust to pay you back. If you are $28 trillion in debt, it's real important that you don't pay high interest rate on the debt. How do you pay low interest rates? You show that you're willing and able and always pay back in full and on time. So this piece of political theater will probably cost America hundreds of billions of dollars and higher interest rates in the future, assuming that we don't actually go over the cliff. Why is this a political stunt? The way the U.S. government pays back the money it owes is more or less by borrowing money and printing it. Because we owe money in the U.S. dollar, and only the U.S. government's Federal Reserve is allowed to print money. Now, it's an independent agency, but we can pay this back. This would be a political decision to undermine the creditworthiness of the U.S. government, which is the largest debtor in the history of the world, presently owing nearly $30 trillion to individuals and companies around the world. It would be a cataclysmically reckless, highly dangerous, potentially economically cataclysmic piece of political theater for a minority party's efforts to win in a recently redistricted, voting rights restricted midterm election. And any other explanation of it probably fails to capture the depth of the shallow cynicism being played out here.
Dr. Max Wolf, everybody. That's why he's here every Thursday on the Santita Jackson Show, everybody. We're going to talk for a couple minutes.
Not welcome in many other locations.
Love you. We're going to stay right here, everybody, on YouTube, just for a couple minutes. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show, Lord willing. Dr. Wolf, it is absolutely reckless. I mean, this game of chicken that they're playing. I mean, the credit worthiness of the United States.
Steamroller.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's not like a fun game, right? You got a bicycle, I have a steamroller. I think I'm just going to put it on cruise control.
Well,
I know people don't think about it, right? But if you owe $28 trillion and you pay 2% to borrow money for 30 years, why would you mess with that? Everything about the way the federal government of the United States works, and therefore the states and cities, is predicated on being able to go more and more into debt without paying high interest rates. The budget's predicated on the assumption that you can increase the total leverage in the system without having any normal commensurate rise in interest rates.
So if you look at the U.S. government, it's kind of amazing, right? So as the U.S. government has become clearly disadvantaged, less and less likely to be able to pay things back normally, more and more in debt, interest rates have actually fallen. Right now, that may be related to the $8 trillion balance sheet of the Federal Reserve. So all these people who hate the Federal Reserve and think they're such an evil enemy and they should stop buying bonds seem to have forgotten that if they do, then the federal government of the United States can't afford these tax cuts and social programs. Because the Federal Reserve is lowering the cost of borrowing money as the U.S. government borrows itself silly.
Are they alarmed?
You can't just look at one piece of this, right? This is the old joke of the hands on the elephant. If you're a blind guy with your hand on the elephant, you never figure out it's an elephant. You just see like what you think is a tree or a leaf.
I mean, are they alarmed by what they're seeing? I mean, the Federal Reserve, and really, I would say our creditors around the world. Are they alarmed by?
Well, the Federal Reserve is a major creditor too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Look, people don't like the Federal Reserve. Well, I get it, whatever. But like the Federal Reserve is pretty bureaucratic. It's technocratic, which is good for the U.S. It is largely people who are not super political, who are trying to manage the commanding heights of the global economy. And they do a pretty darn good job, and they're pretty kind of bureaucratic, nonpartisan, technocratic. And of course they're worried. I mean, you don't have to guess. The former head of the Federal Reserve, now Treasury Secretary, Dr. Yellen, is on TV screaming this stuff. And all the Federal Reserve governors are saying, hey, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, even though they know they're liable to get partisan attacks, which they are getting, which they started getting really heavily during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, which has picked up. So there's been a politicization of the Federal Reserve, which had been one of the last areas that was less politicized. So they know they'll get slammed for saying this and be accused of being, agents of some liberals or states, or maybe putting some sort of partisanship out there into the monetary policy, all of which patently false. So they know they take a risk. But yeah, there's no one out there saying this is a good idea who's in a professional economist that I've ever seen.
Wow.
There'll be people who say it's survivable, right? That I mean, I'm not disputing that. I'm not sure that's a great recommendation. Like, hey, try my quiche. Most people survive it. Like, I'm sure it's a great recommendation. But yeah, I wouldn't go to that restaurant based on that Yelp review personally. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a question of whether it's fatal. Sure. Could you bounce back easily? Probably. Is that a recipe or an endorsement of a policy trajectory? Yeah, I wouldn't say so. No, this is really what you don't want from a leader. Whatever leadership means, and I'll be the first to admit that's complicated and somewhat subjective, this is the opposite of it. This is narrow self-interest trumping the minimum standard of care. Right? This is somebody you would not let plant sit for you. But instead of plant sitting, they've got your baby in neonatal ICU and they're watching it.
Whew. This is a mess. It's a mess.
We've also seen this movie before. It's also a crappy sequel, right? Like this has been done a whole bunch of times, and the problem is that it's a little bit of a strange game of chicken, right? Because when we've seen it done before with the debt ceiling, the one or two times they kind of went over the waterfall, most recently about a decade ago, it was a disaster because if you actually shut down the federal government, first of all, your cost of borrowing does rise. It sort of announces to the world the sort of profligacy of the U.S. And it promotes the global domination of China big time. This is like accelerating the rise of China. So there should be a statue of Mitch McConnell right next to the statue of Donald Trump in every major Chinese city.
Maybe there is.
The rise of China.
But he does this so regularly, I can't help but wonder. I'm like, what are you doing? And I think that the business interest, well, I think that the business interests of these people who would do this to the United States need to be examined. Because there's something about this.
In some cases, sure.
Yeah, well, certainly in his case. because this happens so regularly.
Yeah,
This goes beyond hubris, and this is the United States
Yeah, this is
exceptional. We can do this. No, we cannot. We cannot. This is no longer a
I will tell you one
unipolar
funny
world.
thing, though.
Well, I mean, it's no longer a
No, for sure not.
unipolar world. I mean, it is a multipolar world. China is ascendant, and guess what? They're going to be the
Look
biggest
at
economy.
Afghanistan.
I mean, come on. We act as if this is still, this is 1920. This is 2021.
Yeah. So look, there's a good old saying in military strategy: when you're the only person who's sure you have tactical superiority, you lose.
How about that?
Right? Like, that's not good. So obviously that's a bad move. But the one thing to keep in mind that's kind of interesting is the reason that they probably will swerve in the end, which is a little bit of what this short-term deal is. It's trying to swerve but still win, right? It's because if you actually shut down the U.S. government within because the U.S. government spends $4 trillion doing vital things that we all need every year, $4 or $5 trillion. So there's also this ideological notion here that the U.S. government is this big, wasteful, we don't need it, it's just for poor people or for a few rich companies that rip everyone off. And while, of course, there are serious inefficiencies that need to be addressed and waste and all that does exist. The central government in the United States is hugely important and a behemoth astride the global economy. So if you want to show everyone how dependent and how much they need and benefit from the federal government, the irony is the most dramatic way to show them how important the government is to turn it off, which is why the debt ceiling stuff is a little bit of a game of chicken, but they can't really pull the trigger. I mean, they may, right? So you don't want to bet on someone being just 80% nuts and not 100% nuts. But if you actually let the federal government shut down, the costs are very immediate, and not just for millions of people who draw their essential paychecks and services and Social Security and disability checks and all things like that, but that's obviously relevant. It just becomes very clear very fast to a large number of people how important and meaningful the federal government is in their lives. So it's funny, if you have an ideological project that the federal government's not important, and then you turn it off for like 10 minutes, it's unsustainable, but it's unimportant. You know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
It's very adolescent. We have an adolescent relationship with the central government, right? Which is angry and dependent. So we need this, we still live in that house. That's still how the rent gets paid and the food gets bought, but we're really angry and we fancy ourselves independent. We aren't. And the quickest way for that kid to figure out that mommy and daddy aren't just useful people who listen to the wrong music is to spend, say, 6 hours wandering around and start thinking about the joys of betting down on the ATM.
Okay. You think you don't need mommy and daddy? I mean, come on. This is the thinking is crazy. It's like you said, it's adolescent.
Or it's
not
emotional.
Crazy. It's very,
Actually,
very
what it
young.
is very emotional. Yeah, I always think that's interesting too. It's very emotional. It tends to be very emotional, very ego-driven decision-making from a group of people who are sure that they alone, as men, can be in charge because women are too emotional.
Ugh.
Which I think is the final irony. You'd be like what? Like this? I mean, this is emotional.
It's crazy.
You know you can't do this. You know this doesn't work. You know it's bad for people, but you think it might be good for you. I think that's literally textbook irresponsibility.
Oh yeah.
It has that, and it's probably not fair of me to say this, but it has that adolescent flavor.
But it does.
So I can't connect to the responsibility that I have. I can't imagine the consequence of my action. Right, and that gets us to another uncomfortable place for a lot of people, which is it's pretty entitled. It's pretty entitled behavior.
All of which is
because if you think you'll be accountable, you wouldn't do it.
But it's very American. It's very, very American, and this is where our hubris is beginning to catch up with us.
Not the best of America.
No, it's not. But it's very much who we are at our core. We're the ones who have to make a decision about who we want to be and how we're going to live. This is not going to work. It's just not. What we're doing is just, this is foolish. It's foolish. And, you know,
My
you and I
family was
both.
mostly immigrants, and my grandmother had a funny theory about that. So she's obviously deceased now for a while, but her line about being afraid of moving to the United States and thinking she might move back to Europe, where she was born and had grown up a bit, was once a pretty sort of insightful and funny, which was America has to decide what it wants to be when it grows up, but right now it hasn't decided to grow up.
Wow.
That was what she thought was scary. It's kind of an interesting immigrant's perspective on things, I think.
Well, I don't think it's just immigrant. I really think that it's, I mean, I think I think it's whenever I think you have to be an outsider, if you will. And I think Black people have that perspective. You know, Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the two-ness, the duality of the African American, of the Black American, of the Negro American. You know, because we're deep inside. We built the country, but we're also outsiders because we're treated as such. So it gives you a perspective that many people do not have, and we have it. And of course, being part of the dispossessed of Europe, trying to figure out where she lived in the world, you know, having been so hated. You know, your grandmother was an outsider too, so she could step back and, you know, outsiders can step back and look and say, you know what, you're doing this, that, and the other, because I'm in it, but I'm not. You know, I think
if you're forced to live in a few different countries and try to figure out a couple different languages, you have a profound sense of being outside looking in. Because, you know, the other thing is immigrants are great students of American life because they're trying to learn. They're trying to figure out things that a lot of us, like myself, who are born here and grew up here, we kind of take for granted. And so they have a self-consciousness, and they tend to be more attentive students, I think, to how things work because they got to figure it out from scratch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, I think it's all really, really, really interesting, you know, what we're living through. But we are going to have to decide, I think, at this point, if we want to grow up. You know, because as you know, we are a child among the nations of the world, you know, a little more than 200 years of age. We're kids, and we are adolescent with all of this power, with this enormous power. And I'm just hoping.
A lot of potential too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look.
Being young is being full of potential.
I love America, and I want us to. I want us to do what we're supposed to do. You know, I really want us to get right. And you know, and so I make no bones about that. I love our country. I love it. And I want us to get right. I want us to get right. And that's why we have to have these conversations. And as your grandmother said, do you want to grow up? I think you got to make that decision. Got to make it. Got to make it. You can't play these games. And you cannot behave as if you're always going to be number one, because that's not true. Dr. King talked about that. He chastised America in our hubris, our arrogance, our super arrogance, because hubris takes arrogance to a whole different level. He said, God will raise up a country and you will not know their name, and they will knock you off your pedestal if you do not get right. And we're going to have to do that, Max. We are going to have to do that.
Even if you do get right, supremacy can't be the assumption, but it's also not a solution to a lot of our domestic issues. Even when we were a unipolar world astride, you know, when America astride that world, it didn't solve our internal issues in any convincing way in many areas.
Oh, absolutely. But you know, I think this is a very interesting time, and we're going to see. I think there's a whole lot that we're going to see. And I'm anxious for us to make the right decisions.
That's a big stress test too, right?
Oh, man.
I mean, COVID is quite a stress test. Long, deep, profound, right? I mean, as we blow through 700,000 lives lost and tens of millions of folks infected, you know, a generation of kids who know the world as a world of COVID.
Absolutely.
You know, different people think about that differently, but it's easy for me. I got a 4-year-old, so half my daughter's life has been lived under COVID. She doesn't, for her, going outside means wearing a mask. And it's good. I'm glad she wears her mask, but it's kind of sad too.
I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. Bless her heart. These kids are growing up just in a whole different way walking around with masks. How do you socialize? Whew, boy, oh boy. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Well, the good news is she still thinks it's really fun and exciting to go on the subway because we try to minimize her trips. So, yeah, sometimes some things are positive. It's hard to sell a New York kid on how exciting it is to go on a filthy train full of crowded, angry people, but she still thinks it's awesome. So there's some upside there. $3, a very good price for a vacation.
Oh, man, look. And she can walk through the turnstile. This is so exciting.
Well, they don't even bother her. She can walk underneath it.
That's
Still.
what I'm
She's
saying.
still
That's,
like small enough.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
Then you get tall enough and you're over it.
Anyone who's got a kid on a subway or any public transit system knows the following, though. Kids like to touch things and then lick their hands or touch their hands to their face. And when what they're touching is that subway, that pole, it is a pretty scary moment. We're like, no! Like, oh, my God, did that kid just lick the subway pole? You're like, oh, wow. The only good news is they have pretty good immune systems, these kids.
Oh, bless her heart. Oh, my goodness. Remind me, I've got to call my goddaughter today. She's on her way out of the country. Boy.
Well, tell her to be careful what she's touching on the trains. You guys have trains too, right? Elevated trains, but
yeah,
I'm sure
I think
plenty of things that would terrorize a parent that you could touch on the train there too.
Oh yeah, but I think she's going to Brussels. She'll be there for.
They have a train system too.
Yeah, I know.
A nice one.
Yeah, I just have to see how she's doing, but I'm saying goodbye to everybody on Facebook. Sending you all much love, everybody. See you tomorrow.